Good morning and welcome to everyone for this wonderful opportunity to share the work of Gunnar Norrman and his present exhibition, which opens at the gallery this week, called Dedicated Attention. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge with great pleasure Andy Fitch and all of the wonderful cooperation that he has provided the gallery with. Andy probably knows better, but it feels like 3 or 4 decades since I first came across Gunnar's work at an exhibit in Paris and then contacted him. And we've worked together all those years in a wonderful way to make sure that Gunnar's work is shared widely. So, Andy, thank you, thank you, thank you for your kind help, cooperation, and continued help and cooperation. Today is one of those amazing days that has happened over the last 102 or 3 days, where we moved back into the world of art and its ability to, I think, nourish us, sustain us, and support us, as the world around us sometimes seems not to do those things, but rather to try to humiliate and diminish lots of people. And so that with Gunnar's work particularly, there is an element of kindness and humanity, and I would even use the word love in a more general sense, to be enriched and elevated. So it's just a wonderful opportunity to be together with good friends to talk about the work, each of whom I'll call upon as we begin to look at the pieces, and then they can tell you a bit more about themselves. But thank you to each of the people who participated. So let's begin with the cover piece of the catalog, and then a moment to look at it, and then look at it separately from being part of the design of the catalog. And here we go. So I'm going to begin, which is often what I do, with a quote from Brother Thomas, who seems to be an eternal source of good quotes when talking about art. Every moment of life is worthy of celebration. Just to live is holy. Just to live is holy. And I wanted to ask Andy to begin to talk about Gunnar's worldview in relation to nature and the preciousness, poetry, and possible holiness of nature. So, Andy, please.
Well, he communed with nature. I mean, he was so close to it. I recount that episode when we went to the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens and sorry, he wandered off the path up to a small tree and began to fondle the leaves and talk to it and say his Latin name. And then he came back. Just that, and behind his house, he had an enormous garden that was thoroughly cultivated, but looked kind of wild, and must have taken every moment that he wasn't devoting to art or music. And he just was immersed in the surroundings of southern Sweden at Loma, where he lived, and his garden, and he had a communion with nature. I don't know how else to put it.
I would say that in that garden, he mentioned that he liked white flowers the best. So that's what he illustrated in that print.
It's extraordinary. It probably is based upon a drawing, I would assume, where he kind of lets the white of the paper come through.
Exactly.
And in order to translate it into a dry point, it seems to me it's even more an act of virtuosity.
Yes,
Rusty?
absolutely. And
Sorry.
if you look closely, you see that he's taken infinite pains to have some of these vertical grasses come in front of the flower and some in, most of them in back. I don't know just how he did that. Do you?
Well, yes, you interrupt the line where the white, when
No,
it hits the
but
white.
how
But-
he made the white, kept the white flowers white. I know in drawings he used to erase some of the pencil, but I don't know.
But what it says to me also that he preferred white flowers is his purity and his innocence, which was something that you always felt in his nature when you met him, that he was a very pure soul.
By innocence, she means like, I think, childlike.
Yes.
Directness.
Yes.
It sounds lovely. Mara, would you respond to the work itself?
Well, this piece reminds me of a quote, and please do not ask me to remember who said it, but I used it once in a show on flowers that I used. It's all flowers keep their light. Meaning that they have, they grow because of light, and then they reflect light, particularly a white flower reflects light. And even a cut flower just maintains its light until it's gone. And it's the light. I mean, Dominique talked about purity and, but it's the light that these flowers are bringing into this misty, medium tone, delicate work that actually make the image breathe. And I'd also like to notice that the flowers, like some of them are just poking themselves up and they're a bud, others are partially open. There's one of those 4 dark dots to the right center of the screen, which is the accent, the articulation of the bud itself, and just make the whole print for me, is that he's capturing a moment that is only going to be that moment, and everything else is going to burst forth like the bigger flowers in just a moment, the moment right beyond our experience.
What a lovely way to think about it, but also the idea of the title of the show, namely dedicated attention. He brings that to the work, and then he allows us to bring it to his rendition of what he saw and experienced. So there's an extraordinary opportunity to immerse yourself in the world according to Gunnar, which is quite extraordinary. Let's look at the next piece. And Andy, it sounded like you wanted to begin.
Sorry, I hear badly. This is Gunnar is renowned for a soft touch, delicacy, sensitivity, but he could be pretty rough and direct. And some of his dark prints, like this one, are are really muscular in a way that the work we are just looking at is not. And I love them. The strength of the rich black that comes out. I never get enough. And then the contrast, of course, is very strong.
So Dominic, do you want to talk about technically how he gets the rich black?
Exactly. It's one of the big beauty of dry point is that it's fantastic at creating contrast. You have the most delicate lines possible, which of course he uses in the trees, but you can also, because you keep the burr in the plate, the roughness catches the black like nothing else. And it almost makes me think of music with the deep, deep tones and then the very light notes or something. And Gunnar was, of course, also a magnificent piano player. So I can hear that musical feeling in there.
Does everybody understand about the burr?
The dry.
Why don't you share that, because it's relevant as we go through all the pieces.
Yes.
The dry point creates a little furrow, and you can take it off, but if you leave it, that holds more ink. So that's how you get such a rich
Black.
printing when the artist desires it. With an etching, it's different. You can get dark, but it's not achieved the same way.
It has
Correct.
almost a velvety black feeling.
Indeed. So one more point I think that's important to make, at least in the video, was that Ulla did a good deal of the printing for him.
Indeed.
They printed together.
Yeah. So there's a wonderful video, which probably seems quite arcane. I think it's in black and white and in Swedish with subtitles, but it gives you a nice sense of their working together, and the press itself and the blankets and the care with which the plate itself is wiped in order to create, as he does in the drawings, the fullness of shading within that space. Rusty, your thoughts about this piece?
A couple of things. I'm afraid I'm somewhat redundant. I think the whole concept of music in Gunnar's work is incredible. The first piece I was thinking Chopin, Ravel. I mean, there's a delicate tone to it that just feels somewhat musical. The second thing is simply the contrast. This is like salt and pepper. I mean, the most amazing use of white in the first piece, and now a very strong element of black, which creates not a negative emotion, but a different emotion. You know, as Andy was saying, that black is a muscular black. But then all of Gunnar's works have this contrast where it could be white with very, very delicate reeds. The reeds in that first piece were amazing. And it reminds me of the Japanese photographer Hiromi, who we'll see more on the seashore pictures, but it's different levels of reality, from water to air, etc. But here, you know, you have, and Dominique mentioned it, the delicateness of the trees in the background contrasted with this solid wall of black. And in the first piece, it was this beautiful white contrasted with the delicate reeds that were linear as opposed to floral. So the combination is just such an amazing skill. His clustering, and we'll see more of that with the trees that come up, the way he clusters things, it just catches the eye, but it's also a very soothing and I don't know. Again, Bernie, what you said, you want to come up close to his works. You want to engage in them, because the closer you get, the deeper you go into them, the more they have to offer you.
I think that's very, very helpful. In addition to which, I just want to call people's attention to the fact that this is 5 inches high by 4¼ inches wide. And yet the sense of the total space is enormous. So a wonderful opportunity to engage and be part of a universe that he has created. Let's move on to the lithograph, if we can. Thank you. And at this point, Mara, I would love for you just to begin to talk with us clearly between drawing, dry point, and lithograph. Most of the lithos took place in the 50s and early 60s, I think, Andy, is that right?
Yes.
And so,
Yes. Sorry.
but
Voice.
Mara, if you speak about the piece, then we can go back to the transition from one graphic technique to a next.
Okay. I don't know how much people like to go into the differences between all these print techniques, but on a lithograph, you're on a stone, and so it's a very smooth surface, and lithograph crayons are very waxy, very, and so they can be very bold. What strikes me about this one, I mean, I'm used to a dry point having the utmost delicacy in it. Rusty was talking about just the single stroke reeds and the delicacy of the background and the trees. But here, a litho crayon is this big, thick, waxy thing. It is amazing to me how delicate this is, how drawn this is. I mean, this relates to pencil sketching in a way that printmaking, I mean, they're all linear, so they're all drawn. But for me, it's the contrast in how technically adept he is at every single printmaking technique is shocking. Most people can be a good lithographer, but they're not good at dry point or aquatint, or he's like a master of every single printmaking technique he touches. And so, you know, for me, this one with the smoothest going all the way to the edge, there are no plate marks on a lithograph the way there are in an etching or a print that's biting into the paper in a certain way. And yet the edge and how softly and refined this edge is, the squareness, and just how it melts across the page compared to the dark darks of the slide before us, where in the edge you see just this finessed mark making all the way down the outside edge before you get to the bite of the plate, with no smudging.
Right.
There's no
A technical
smudging.
term.
I mean, in the dry point, in the blacks, that velvety thing, the inking of the plate is so precise. If you look at the edges, along the dark edges in the last one, and the softness of the touch and the smoothness of the touch and the right amount of crayon has been left behind here. Most people just don't have that touch in printmaking. It mushes on there's too much ink, or there's too much crayon, or it clots in certain places. Beyond this image, for me, the more you understand about printmaking, the more amazing this man becomes. It's not beyond the image, it's how the technique and the image work together for me. It's a level of expertise I've seldom seen.
I totally agree. Andy, can you talk about the transition from the lithographs, which were still based on drawings, to the dry points?
With difficulty.
Okay, well, we'll take that too, but I just think it's important to at least engage it or think about it.
The lithographs are, as Mara said, much closer to drawing. With a dry point, there's more, it's less intuitive, I think. You have to guide the needle so precisely. And I would relate that to his musicianship, because he played the piano the same way, with strength when called for and incredible delicacy also when needed. I can't talk about a transition because he kept doing lithographs, but much less, but he did them occasionally throughout. But he started out, because he started out with drawing, he went to lithography, and then he discovered the dry point, for which there's a strong tradition in Sweden. They had some very noteworthy dry point artists, maybe 30, 40 years before Gunnar came. Stigborg. Their names we don't know well here, but they're more or less national treasures in Sweden.
So let's move on to the next piece, which is again a dry point, but the opportunity to have the richness of the black.
Okay, Bernie froze for me. How about everybody else?
Yeah. But
Yes.
the voice ran away.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is it?
Bernie,
Okay.
Bernie's
Oh,
screen.
He's going out. He's come in and gone out a couple of times.
He'll
Yeah.
come back. If Rusty, if you want to start on this one.
Yeah, I
the
think
response.
I love this particular piece because what I felt was Gunnar captured the essence of pine trees in this little area. When you think of pine trees, you think of needles, and somehow as I expand this, as I look at it. And one of the joys for everyone who's watching, if you can expand on your screen these images, you get to see so much in terms of the texture. But here you see the combination again of what Mara saw, the black dots, and then the very delicate strokes of the needles. And rather than show a big tree which again, the last image showed trees in a line, and we'll talk more, I hope, about the disappearing line that he uses so frequently, lining up trees in certain ways and hills. But this is a much more similar to the original print. It's right there. It's right there for you to have. But again, to me, the beauty of how it was done and the essence and so much of what Gunnar does is an essence. I mean, the seashore is an essence of the seashore. It's sort of a capturing of that. What do you think when you think of seashore? This is what do you think when you think of pine trees and you're sort of underneath looking up. So beautiful, beautiful capturing of what he's able to do in a very small space.
So, can I add something? Is Gunnar was trained as a botanist.
Yes.
And when, as Andy mentioned, when we would visit garden with him, he would know the Latin name of all the plants and everything. But what that branch shows is that he's rendering, a botanist drawing would be exact, but he infuses it with life. You know, that branch bristles. And so it's the quality of the line is alive instead of just being a rendering of the plant.
And made more alive
It's
by the contrast.
And yes.
With the misty, diffuse background, which is.
And I think that's what gives me that feeling of essence, rather than saying it's just a branch. It's the essence of what.
It's alive.
It's a pictorial strategy he uses pretty regularly to bring something forward and push the background. We'll see another later, I think, with the same idea.
Let me add at this point two things, one of which is that on and off, I'm connected and disconnected, which is true of my daily life too. But in terms of the WebinART, I can't always respond. And two, to share the quote from Brother Thomas, which I think may be helpful here because it wants to get back to the question of the emotion and the spirit. Art is a transparency through which we see what is most human in us, our appetite for the spiritual. And I know that in general, people don't often speak of art these days as something which engages the spirit, but I would argue that in Gunnar's case especially, there is this opportunity for us to, within ourselves, recognize our own spirit and then join it together with the way that he has related to the world around him. So
Bernie,
that's just,
Bernie, I would just add to that you have to engage to reach something spiritual. And what Gunnar does and some of our other artists is give you the option, more than the option, sort of a opportunity to engage. What he creates asks you to look deeper, and that's where you can find something more.
all agreed.
Yes.
No, Caroline, are you showing a small video or not now?
It should be.
Okay,
Yes,
let's take a peek. Okay, thank you. So this is just a moment to see the press. That is his wife, Ulla, placing the blankets on the press. And I just love the idea of them working together because there is a duo or duet. There you go.
He's completely indispensable.
Yeah.
In everything, and she finished his sentence.
Yes.
That's not bad. We don't happen to have that print available. But it was just wanting people to have an idea of the two of them working so closely together. And he obviously is the fashioner of the image, but together they bring the image, especially the dry points, to life. Let's look at the next image if we can, please. Mara, up to you. It's so beautiful.
So this is pencil.
Yeah.
So again, as in the lithostone, using the side edge of the pencil or the side of the litho crayon to get the gradations in the background, and then a point of a pencil or an edge of the lithostone to get the dark darks. So I'm just going to ask a question. Based on this piece, the piece we saw of the pine needles that drop in from above, with the seascape in the background, this one with a rock or a landscape in the background, very, very only hinted at. We have another one later that are blackberries that drop in from above or the side. I tend to think of these pictorial conventions as very Japanese. And now, Bernie, you've been to Japan 4 times. I never have been. You've been to the North countries. I actually never have been and have not really studied. I'm a contemporary art person, so I've got some good general knowledge, but I haven't studied the Scandinavian pictorial conventions in depth. But what is it about Scandinavia and Germany and the aesthetic values that they hold sort of intrinsically culturally and the pictorial conventions that make them so aligned with what I would have to call the ineffable, that it's like beyond the closely observed branch that's focused on, and this meltingly, hauntingly beautiful background that somehow recedes. There's a poignancy and an act of not showing everything that it's just so beautiful to me. So, and I don't know if there is a cultural impulse on either part of the spectrum, Japan over and down here and the North countries over and up there, of how that came about.
This is a good topic. I mean, I don't know if this sounds foolish, but you can't really imagine this print coming from a Latin American artist. Myself.
I can't even imagine it coming from an American artist who isn't deeply influenced by Japanese printmaking or Japanese brush painting, sumi ink paintings. Like, I don't imagine it coming any place other than someplace that is, Asian or someplace that is really northern. And I don't know why that is.
Well, what Gunnar is very good at showing also is a silvery light of Sweden. In here, we are further south, the light has much more gold in it. In the northern country, the sun is more white than yellow, and the light is very silvery, and Gunnar really shows you that light.
And so there's my point of view, which is that what we are looking at is the creation of a single human being. And granted, he is influenced by the world around him, but the spirit and the Hebrew word neshama, which is the uniqueness of each of us as human beings, is what makes these pieces as engaging for me. Granted, he needs the inspiration of the place where he lives, whether it's Japan or whether it's Northern Europe. But I would argue that wherever he would have been situated, there is the possibility of being engaged by the way he saw that world, because the world is from his inside, and then it is inspired by what's outside him. And that, for me, is what the joy of art is, that each of these creators, Samuel Bach deals with an inner landscape of brokenness and destruction that's not only European, it's universal. And so I feel more at ease with saying, this is just the work of an amazing artist who has enabled us to enter a space, a place in a very specific way that only he has the key to, and then he shares it with us. So I understand the need to, Mara, to think about place influencing the art, but these pieces, and we can look at the next one where we're,
Bernie, before you go,
yeah,
to me, I don't want to lose track of the fact that he was a botanist.
yeah,
And he knows each one of these plants intimately and is able to display them with a certain acknowledged caring that he wants you to see. And so part of his choice, I think, in how he creates these images is what gives you what gives the best presentation to the specific characteristics of the plants that he knows intimately well. And I think the idea of the background and all of his backgrounds are very subtle and well, not all of them, but in a particular case where he says, I want your eye to really take in this plant. But if I just put a bunch of stuff in the background or put nothing in the background, that doesn't work as well. So he's figured a technique of resolving lines and hills and roads and things that bring your eye where he wants it. And I think it's a dedication actually to the plant.
interesting. So I'm just going to add just one quote and then we'll go on to the next image, which is Thomas wrote, doing something out of duty is fine, but doing it out of love is divine. And I really think that that inspiration, and you, Andy and Dominique knew him personally, and he doesn't have to exude this sense of spirituality, but his work for me certainly does share an optic on the spiritual world that I admire. Next image, please. There we go. Another lithograph, and this one goes, one we saw before, I think was from 1980. This goes back to 1949. Andy, would you like to sort of, yeah, I think the first piece, the earliest piece you've ever sent is from 1942.
Right. It's very early. It's large for he
Yep.
really goes. This is almost 18 inches, and his normal large size is 12 inches. So he really wanted to emphasize the height of the trees here, obviously, making it tall and narrow. And it's a drawing on stone. It could almost, it seems to me, just as well be a drawing as a lithograph. That's kind of tendentious because lithographs are drawings just on stone.
Right.
But
And in reverse.
yeah,
Right.
but it's a beautiful drawing of trees. I don't know.
Sometimes that's enough to say. Mara, you'll have something to say, though.
Well, I just love pairing the title with, intimations of spring, and you have to look really closely, but sprinkled on those lonely branches are the buds,
Yeah.
like sprinkled. So, I mean, talk about paying close attention to nature and asking us to pay close attention both to nature and to art. The intimations are just bare notes against these trees. But Rusty, here are your trees, your receding trees. So you go on.
Well, what Gunnar does with trees is phenomenal. We'll see a couple more, but he puts them in groups of 2 or 3. Here he's put a large group together, but it still looks like a family. There's an anthropomorphism in his trees that gives you a sort of a warm and fuzzy feeling. It's like I look at this and I think of people at a picnic or something, because you can see the other trees sort of fade gradually, at a farther distance. So you have the ones up front that are amazing and they capture you. But then the more you look into this, the more trees you find and the more delicate they become. Why? Because they're a little bit further away and there's a sort of sense of mist, but there's just a warm feeling, which so many of his works have. And the trees are, he just does wonders with trees. Nobody does trees like Gunnar.
So, Caroline, I'm sorry, these chatty people made me forget to call on you. So I would love it if you would sort of begin sharing a younger person's view?
Well, I mean, he Gunnar's work just captures that the essence of nature in such a humble way that it captures the true majesty of when you take a picture of the pretty flower and it does no justice on your phone, but his works capture the atmosphere. It instills that into his prints, and I mean, it's like nothing I've ever. It's better than a photograph, and yet it's so accurate. I can't think of many other people who, especially with this example, can draw basically each little line. I would never recommend someone try to draw the branches, but his work, he's able to capture it because he has a knowledge of the layout that's much more intimate because of his background. But I mean, it just makes something so more real than, just the photo on your phone. It becomes magical. It's so grounded, it becomes magical.
You sometimes hear the word hyper real, and I think that's what you're saying. It's hyper real. It goes beyond what a picture would look like.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it does also remind me that our windows look out on the Charles River, where there's a gathering of trees, which during the winter is open, and there's a view of Cambridge and MIT. In the past 2 weeks, from the small buds and then ever increasing in size, and then the opening of the buds into leaves, Cambridge now has a green curtain over it, and I can't see it. But Gunnar's ability to sensitize us to see better is exactly what I've just enjoyed over the past 2 weeks. So it's an enormous amount of joy that he brings to me in seeing. We move from nature into a seaside on the Atlantic coast. Andy, I don't know if you were with him when he was traveling in this area, but he did enjoy traveling, and except when it rained, when he did still life. Can you speak a little about this and the way he thought about the spaces?
It's the way he captures a seaside mist throughout. This one, the boats are almost ghostly, yet the structure in the distance is quite solid. This drawing is all about shading and making something appear from nothing, and it's got a kind of magical quality.
And Mara?
Okay, what amazes me about this is that he's allowed light to create this picture. It is not linear. He did not do a seawall by defining the seawall by a line down its side and across the top. He uses the edge of his pencil, and the edge builds up to create that line, but it's built up because of shadow. It's not built up because of a linear quality. And which gives it that idea that the whole thing is melting in the mist. There is some very light accenting on the pier-like structures that are upper mid quadrant, and a few little sides of rocks that are definitely in shadow, or pylons up on this, or people maybe up on this upper level. We don't know because they're just marks. But it's how he conveys this scape that he's looking at, this misted scape, is all because of his use of shadow to create form as opposed to line to create form.
It just takes your breath away, and it was sort of nice to have this after all the trees and the flowers and the bushes and so on, to come to this and realize that there is a gentleness, an elegance of touch that enables him to create these gradations and the sense of light in the piece itself. It's really quite extraordinary. And Caroline, you get one more of this one.
Well, this, I love I mean, we've touched on it, just the range of voice he has within the pieces, and how that connects to music for sure. But the strength of leaving things alone and letting them be, which is very hard to do, and then very strong moments of intense shadow, where the rocks are, where this pier-like structure is, to add some real strong intensity. How effective that is. I mean, it's masterful. I mean, I think one of the hardest things to learn when you're making art is when to stop. And he certainly has such a talent there to let things be as they are. That's where it becomes kind of spiritual. A lot of his work, you really see the person in it, not just the landscape.
It's a wonderful idea of when it is appropriate to stop. Let's move to the next piece, please. Just to take it in and to enjoy the richness of the dry point, especially the berries in this particular piece. Andy and Dominique, your thoughts about this?
Well, once again, one sees that wonderful contrast between the weight of the berries hanging, lowering that branch. And I would say for all of Gunnar's work, I wouldn't point to that his respect to nature,
Yeah.
Love and respect that he shows, just the beauty of its existence. And it really, as you all mentioned, it gives such a spiritual quality to his work.
This is this is one of a handful of subjects that were commissioned rather than self-inspired, and it's a large edition of 100, but, of which we probably have had a dozen pass through our hands, and it's got the richness and the delicacy and unusually almost no background. I mean, there's no mountain, there's no nothing. This time it's just the beauty of these berries, and they're remarkably successful. I've always loved this print particularly.
So was this steel faced in order to get 100 of them?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's just a way to, in a way, enable a print plate like this to endure long enough to make 100 impressions for people's general information.
Strengthen the surface of the print so it doesn't flatten as quickly.
Correct. So I think next we have a small clip again. At least that's what this looks like. Good.
Se va. Jag ser. Kom då. Kom. Ja. Ska vi se här. Jag skyndar, kom nu då. Ja, se. Nej, vad är du för en... Ja, det. Där, se vad det är gott med mandel. Man ska tala med dem. Då går det bättre. Ja, se, det är gott. Det är inte farliga.
That's wonderful.
I thought it would be just wonderful for people to have an opportunity to see this small vignette of a hummingbird come and land on his hand just like that. It really, really is quite extraordinary.
Bernie, look how big his hands are.
Well, I mentioned that before many times that he was
like two of mine.
right. Well, it helps to be a concert pianist if you're going to do that. Maybe not as much to make dry point. Let's look at the next image, please. There we are. My goodness. Mara, all yours.
Oh, I love this piece. An olive grove. Just everything about it. How old these trees are, how gnarled they are, what they're missing and what they have, the darkest darks and the lightest lights. But also, I was thinking about this in the blackberries as well. I wish we had the ability to hold a magnifying glass up to his mark making, because as delicate as it looks, there is incredible line work going on throughout this whole thing. It's not just a soft blend. There's this incredible stroke within each twig of this. So it's not just the growth of the trunk into branches, but each twig all the way out to the leaf work is individualized. It's not just the soft shading of the litho crayon or the pencil. It's just mark by delicate mark. And not just the delicacy of the stroke, but the purposefulness of these tiny little strokes that go into making up this print. And I also have to say, again, with those tiny little strokes, and plus these bird up areas of dark that Dominique was talking about earlier, the inking of the plate and the wiping of the plate to be able to pull this image without smushing it to pieces is masterful.
And he hand wiped everything himself.
But certainly,
That gets you these very subtle gradations, which will make a background alive instead of just a completely flat.
Rusty, your thoughts?
Well, I spoke before about how masterful Gunnar is with trees, and this is just another example. He's given us a whole nother genus of trees. And if you look at this, if you've seen old olive trees, you know exactly. I mean, when I saw it, I said, gosh, olive trees. He captured the essence of it, mostly in that first large tree with the big trunk that olive trees sort of seem to rot a little bit in the middle or whatever, and then they just sprout more branches. And that's what he's captured beautifully. But again, there's a whole waltz going on here. There's a waltz of trees. There's a dance of trees. And that's the music quality, the spiritual aspect of it, I guess, in a way. He does have a little bit of a background here for the whole thing. And I think when he does larger landscapes, trees in general, as opposed to say a limb or the berries or something like that, they don't necessarily have to have that. But here he frequently does that just to give it a perspective. But it's just all the technique that Mara and Dominique are talking about. I mean, his technique is phenomenal, but his view, his conception of where things ought to be in order to create what he wants to create is also underappreciated if you don't look at it very carefully.
It also occurs to me, so this is 1965. He's been working for 20 plus years now and continues to work for close to another 35 years. And to find most of his inspiration in a tree, in a branch, in a bud, in a berry, and then translate that into works of art that engage each and every one of us. Thomas wrote one time, the routine of life holds us in readiness for the events of the soul. And in this case, I would say that Gunnar really is our guide to being alert to and aware of those moments when we can see something or something can be shared with us that enables us to be elevated and uplifted. So let's look at the next piece, which is more structural than it is nature. And Mara, for you to speak about it again, this is a wonderful sort of staccato notes going back and forth.
Well, this is his using his planar techniques and his linear techniques together, as well as this burring of the plate to get his darkest darks. But it's the gate, it's the entrance way. It's so that you've got our world, the gate itself, the dark stone wall and the dark tree, and then you've got this landscape beyond it, and it's almost like you're entering the kingdom, and you could read that kingdom as some wonderful ruins of something in the landscape built by man, or you can read it as the kingdom of God. And I love that gateway between the two, and how one is so prominent and forward, and one is so, reaching into the mists or into the atmosphere, or something so beyond our understanding in the background.
And again, to keep in mind that this is 3.5 by 4 3/4 inches. The whole sense of what he's dealing with probably is, 20 or 30 or 40 feet, but it's been condensed, and yet it has both the sense of larger scale and the intimacy that allows you and I to begin to enter in through this particular fence. Andy, background on this piece of thoughts about it. This is pretty late in his life.
Yeah, this one is hard for me to elaborate on, because I get it less than I get some. I don't really, I guess I don't really get what he's striving for here. Mara brought out the planar qualities. I don't know if the structure of the back right is meant to be a castle or a cliff. It's less, I don't know, I have more trouble relating to it, so I don't want to pretend.
No, no, what, it's a completely different subject, but I wanted to, we saw Gunnar feeding a bird, and we know that birds, couples form a lifetime together. And very often when you hear a bird song, the one of the two start the song, the other finishes it, and it sounds like one sound, one song. And Ulla and Gunnar, when the conversation was, when they were trying to tell you something, one would start, one would answer the word, one would finish the phrase, and it sounded as together as those bird songs are. They met when Ulla was 12. They spent a long life of cooperation and love. It was a wonder to see.
That's a lovely note to have with us as we move to the last piece, which brings us to his still life images, which I think he's certainly not as well known for, but always bring me enormous pleasure. And Rusty, I'd love for you to talk about it, and then we'll move on to Caroline.
Well, it's a whole different sort of image than we've been seeing. It is obviously more less in the natural world, in the sense of being outdoors where trees or bushes or seasides. This is a studio production, something that he probably drew, but then this is a dry point, so you get the black dots and the things that we've talked about in the dry point offers you. There's an element of the geometric in Gunnar that you don't necessarily see if you're focusing on berries and leaves and things. But if you look at almost all of his works, like the previous work, if you look at the line that goes down the wall and the line of the gate, or if you look at a road, because frequently there'll be trees, amazing trees, but there's this road that goes off in the distance at an angle. There's a geometry that he seems to play with. And here we have circles. We have a table that's circular, sort of. We have circular fruit. We have a circular bowl in the setting of this angular corner. And the sense of geometry and of objects gives with making it minimal. This is obviously incredibly minimalistic, but it gives you a sense of enjoying the presence of something very simple. But I think you're drawn in by the geometry of it. I am drawn in by that.
Caroline?
Well, I've printed enough to know just a little bit on the process, or especially with plates, with copper plates, with intaglio especially. But when I look at this, I do know how kind of difficult of a print to ink it would have been. There's so much open space, like a lot of his pieces. And that was a clip we left out of this webinar, but it is, I believe, in the previous webinar where it shows him inking the plate, and he's taking his palm and he's taking time. I don't know how long it would have been for him to clean this up, but it's not just a printer just prints out the ink, right? Or your computer printer. But it's a process to ink it up. It's a matter of manipulating even that negative space. I mean, he could have wiped it away to be fairly clear. There's no lines, there's no burr in that space to open it. That's him rendering it with his hand, with the ink, in a much less direct way than, say, the stone lithography. It is kind of, you ink it up and you can build up the darkness where lines are, but this is different. This is really, it's a beautiful, delicate touch to show that process.
Mara, would you like to add a little bit?
Well, I'd like to sort of combine both Rusty and Carolyn's. There's that hand touch and the delicacy of the touch, and then there's the geometry, but then there's the accenting of a trio or a trinity of the stem, the little flaky part of where a fruit is picked, and then the shadow between the two lower round figures. So you've got this trio or this trinity of dark marks that focuses all the other geometries coming into the piece, and is the mark of the burr as opposed to the mark of the hand on the plate. And I love how they work together.
There's such a simple elegance to both the placement, to the sense of the space itself, with the horizontal line for the floor, the very gentle vertical line for the corner of the room, the sense that this bowl is situated on a table, and he gets us to believe it all, because there is his way of speaking that enables us to engage with the world as he sees it. I think that any great artist does that, and does it with humility and generosity. Gunnar's work seems to me, over the years that we've shown it, and again, I just thank you, Andy and Dominic, for all your help, really has provided us with something that we wouldn't have had otherwise in our lives. And that, for me, is an enormous, enormous gift. Calling this dedicated attention, and we've had all sorts of other names, elegant poetry and so on, all it serves to say is thank you. Thank you for enabling us to enter into the world and have you as our guide, teacher. So thank everybody for being part of this. Loved having an opportunity to share Gunnar's work and to talk about it again and again and again. So thank you, everybody.